Open it, they're already late and you're making them later. The man in the gray suit said it the way men say things they have never once heard the word no follow. He had a tablet under his arm and a lanyard around his neck, and a van idling behind him at the service gate of Holloway Court, and he expected the steel to roll back on the strength of his voice alone. I was 20 feet away in the guardroom doorway when he said it, close enough to see that the guardsman he said it to did not blink. His name was Aldous Finn, and he had the best stillness I have ever stood beside. I am Sergeant Corwin Pace, and I have worn this uniform 11 years, long enough to know the difference between a man who is holding his post and a man who has simply run out of reasons to move. Finn was the first kind. He stood inside the small steel pedestrian wicket beside the vehicle gate, rifle at his shoulder, white gloves folded, bearskin throwing a long shadow down the loading lane, and when the man in the gray suit told him to open it, he answered the only way the post allowed. "This gate admits credentialed and scheduled access only, sir. I have no entry on the board for your crew. I want you to understand what that gate is because the front of Holloway Court, the famous railing, the forecourt, the cobbles where the tourists film is not where palaces are actually lost. They are lost at the back. The service gate is the throat of the place. Linens go in there and laundry comes out. The kitchen deliveries, the florists, the men who fix the boilers and the men who polish the floors. Every face that passes through it is supposed to be on a board the day before, vetted, photographed, signed for by a department that owns the visit. The grand gate has cameras and a crowd. The service gate has a clipboard and one man. That morning the one man was Finn, and I was his sergeant of the watch, and the board on the wall beside him had 4 scheduled entries on it, and none of them was a maintenance crew. "It's on the system," Finn said, meaning the work order. "It's not on mine." "Then your system is behind." Finn, the gray suit man, I should be precise, his lanyard read T. HARGREAVE Facilities tapped his tablet and turned it so the screen faced the wicket. Hargreave Facilities. Emergency ventilation servicing, East Plant Room, authorized this morning. 6 men, 2 hours. The whole thing signed off. He let the word signed sit in the air like it settled the matter. "Now open the gate, soldier, before I make a call that lands on your sergeant's desk." His call would land on my desk. I stepped out of the doorway. "It already has," I said. "I'm the sergeant, Sergeant Pace. Show me the order." He turned the tablet toward me the same way, the practiced flourish of a man used to being believed at a glance, and I made the mistake men like him count on for about half a second. I almost glanced and nodded. The header was right. The Hargreave logo, the estate's facilities crest, a job number, a date, this date. East Plant Room. Emergency. 6 operatives. And down at the bottom in the box where the authorizing officer's name and signature go, the box that turns a piece of paper into a permission, there was a typed name, BOAKES, Estate Facilities Director, and a little scrawl of blue beside it that was supposed to be a signature. Finn had already seen what I was only now seeing. He had been looking at that screen longer than I had. "Sergeant," he said quietly, eyes still forward, "the signature's printed. It's not signed. It's a picture of a signature dropped in the box, and there's no countersign from the duty office. An emergency order to the plant rooms gets a duty countersign or it doesn't move." "It's an emergency," Hargreave said, and his patience was a thin coat now fraying at the cuffs. "Emergencies don't wait for 2 signatures. The plant's overheating. If that east unit fails, the whole east wing loses climate control, and do you know what's stored in the east wing? Do you? No, you stand at a gate. So let me tell you, things that don't survive a hot room. Now I have 6 certified men and a clock, and I am done explaining myself to a doorman." Behind him, the van's engine ticked. 6 men. I could see 2 of them through the windshield, and they were not looking at us with the bored impatience of tradesmen kept waiting. They were watching the gate the way you watch a thing you are about to do something to. One of them had his phone up low against the dash, filming or timing. I couldn't tell which, and either one was wrong. Then it'll take 5 more minutes, I said. I'll confirm the order with the duty office and the facilities director by name. If it's real, your men lose 5 minutes. If it's real, you'll want me to stand by. You'll confirm nothing. You'll open the gate. Hargreaves' voice climbed. I have an emergency order. Refusing it is gross negligence, Sergeant, and when the East Wing cooks, I will personally see to it that the man who stood at this gate and said no is named in the report. Both of you. He pointed at Finn, then at me. By name. I have been threatened with reports before. Every man at this post has. It is the powerless threat of a man who has just discovered that the lever he always pulls is not connected to anything here. But I watched Finn when Hargreaves said it, named in the report, because a threat like that is built to make a young guardsman flinch, and the flinch is the opening. Finn did not give him the opening. He had gone, if anything, a degree more still, the way the air goes still before the weather turns, and when he spoke to me and not to the man. Sergeant, request permission to hold the gate closed pending verification. Granted, I said, hold the gate. And that was the whole of it, the moment everything turned on, though none of us could have told you so yet. A man in a gray suit with a clever piece of paper, a van of 6, a clock he kept pointing at, and one guardsman who would not move a gate that had not been properly opened. Hargreaves' face did something complicated. For just an instant it wasn't anger, it was calculation. He looked at the wicket, and the board, and the camera on the gatepost, and at Finn standing in the only gap in the steel like a brick set into a wall, and you could see him pricing it. The cost of pushing harder against the cost of being remembered. He chose to push. I'm calling Director Oakes right now, he said, and you'll hear him tell you to open it. Good, I said. Put him on speaker. I'd like to hear it too. He hadn't expected that. He turned half away, thumbing his phone, and I caught Finn's eye for half a second long enough. We had both clocked the same 3 things and neither of us had said them out loud. A signature that was a photograph, an emergency with no countersign, and 6 men who watched a gate like a problem instead of waiting at it like workmen. Any one of them on its own was a paperwork error. All 3 together at the throat of the palace, on a morning when the family wing above us was occupied, was something else, and Finn had felt the shape of it before I had. That is the thing about a man who does nothing but stand. He notices what moves. Hargreaves put the phone to his ear, not the speaker, and walked 3 steps toward the van, and the man with the phone against the dash lowered it. The clock he kept waving at was real, I realized, just not the one he'd told us about. I went back into the guard room and picked up the duty line. There is a way these things are supposed to go, and the way is slow on purpose. Slowness is a kind of armor. Anyone in a hurry to get past the slowness should be the first man you stop. The duty office answered on the 2nd ring. Corporal Esch, a steady hand, the sort who reads a board the way other men read a face. Watch room. Esch, it's Pace at the service gate. I've got a Hargreaves Facilities crew claiming an emergency ventilation job, East Plant Room, 6 men this morning. Orders got Director Oak's name printed in the sign-off box, printed, not signed, no duty countersign. Confirm or kill it. A pause, the sound of keys. Stand by. Then, Pace, I've got the morning works board in front of me. There's no plant room job today, nothing in the east. The only facilities entry is a window cleaning team at the west wicket, 2 men, and they came and went at 0740. I've got nothing authorizing a ventilation crew and nothing emergency flagged this week. And Oakes, the order has his name on it. Another pause longer. Director Oakes is on leave. He's been on leave 9 days. He didn't sign anything this morning because he isn't in the country this morning. Esch's voice changed, dropped the flatness. Pace, who's standing at that gate with you? Finn. Keep it shut. I'm flagging this up the chain right now. Do not let that crew pass the line. Repeat, do not admit. I'll have the duty officer on it inside 2 minutes. I hung up and stood for one breath with my hand still on the receiver, because there is a particular cold that comes when a small wrong you've half suspected turns out to be the visible corner of a large one. A printed signature is sloppiness. A director's name forged onto a job the director cannot have authorized because he is 1,000 miles away is not sloppiness. It is a plan. And a plan needs the gate to open in the next few minutes or it does not work, which meant the next few minutes were the only ones that mattered, and the only thing standing in them was a man who would not move. When I came back out, Hargreave had finished his call and pocketed the phone, and he had brought his composure back up over himself like a man shrugging on a coat. "Director Oakes confirms the order," he announced, loud enough for the van. "He says open the gate immediately and he'll be having words with the watch about the delay. There. Now we've wasted 12 minutes my men can't get back." "That's interesting," I said, "because the duty office says Director Oakes has been on leave for 9 days and is out of the country. So either you've just spoken to a man who isn't where he is, or you've spoken to someone who isn't Director Oakes. I let that sit the way he'd let signs sit. Which is it?" For the length of a heartbeat, the loading lane was very quiet. Even the van's engine seemed to drop a note. Hargreaves' mouth opened and shut. Behind him, the door of the van, the side door, the sliding one, moved an inch and stopped, as if a hand on the inside had reached for the handle and then thought better of it. Finn saw that too. I know he did because his right hand, the gloved one, folded over the rifle, settled by a fraction, the smallest possible adjustment, the difference between a man at rest and a man ready. "You don't know who you're talking to," Hargreaves said, and the line came out wrong, too fast, the bluster of a man reaching for a script he'd already lost his place in. "This is going to cost you your career, both your careers. You think a gate makes you somebody. You're going to stand here and explain to the family why their climate system failed, and the East Wing was ruined, because some jumped-up doorman wanted his paperwork stamped twice." "If the East plant room were failing," Finn said, and it was the first thing he'd said directly to Hargreave in 5 minutes, and his voice was perfectly level, almost gentle, "the plant alarm would be sounding in this guardroom. It's wired to this board. It's silent. There is no emergency in the East Wing. There's only your hurry." It was a clean cut, and it landed clean. Hargreave had built his whole approach on a fire that wasn't burning, and Finn had simply pointed at the smoke detector and noted it wasn't ringing. I watched the man's face go through the last of its calculations and arrive, finally, at the place such men arrive when the easy lever fails. He decided the gate would have to be made to open. Enough! He stepped right up to the steel wicket, close enough that his breath fogged the cold bars, close enough that a lesser man would have stepped back. "I'm not asking. Open this gate or I'll have my men open it for you. We have a job to do and we are doing it, and you are one man with a clipboard." "I'm one man with a closed gate," Finn said. "Step aside." "No, sir." 2 words. The whole story is in those 2 words if you want it. Not a shout, not a threat, not a hand raised, just "no, sir," from a man whose entire profession is built on the right to say it. I have heard generals give orders with less authority than Finn put into refusing one, and the reason it carried wasn't that he was loud. It was that everyone in that lane understood in the second after he said it, that there was no version of the next few minutes in which this man opened that gate because he'd been told to. The only way that gate was opening now was if it was meant to, and it wasn't. That was the moment Hargreave made his real mistake. He reached through the bars of the wicket and grabbed the front of Finn's tunic, a fistful of red wool, the brass button straining, and he pulled hard, the way you'd haul a man off balance, as if he could drag a guardsman out through his own gate by the coat. It was a stupid, furious thing to do, and it was also, I understood later, a tell. He wasn't trying to hurt Finn. He was trying to move him. He needed the body out of the gap. The gap was the whole job. Finn did not move. I have stood beside a great many disciplined men, and I have never seen anything quite like the next 2 seconds. Finn didn't strike back. He didn't wrench free in a flail. He let the pull spend itself against his own planted weight, boots squared, knees soft, the rifle never leaving his shoulder, so that Hargreave hauled with everything he had on a man who simply was not available to be hauled. The tunic creaked. A button popped and rang off the cobbles. And Finn rode it, gave nothing, and at the top of the man's pull, when Hargreave was committed and overextended through the bars, Finn's free white glove came up and closed over Hargreave's wrist, not a blow, a clamp, and pinned the grabbing hand flat against the cold steel of the gate. "Sir," Finn said, and now there was iron under the gentleness, "you've laid hands on a guardsman on duty at a royal residence. I'm going to ask you once to let go and step back behind the line." Hargreaves' eyes went to the van. It was a small thing, that look, an instinct, the way a man checks his backup, and it told me everything. He wasn't alone in this, and he wasn't the top of it. The 6 men in the van weren't his crew. They were his nerve. And the moment Finn pinned that wrist to the gate was the moment the whole careful, paper-thin plan tipped over from a delivery that almost worked into a crime caught in the act. The side door of the van slid fully open. 4 men came out of it, and they came out the way trained men come out of a vehicle, not bunched, not bumping, but fanning, one to the left, one to the right, 2 straight on, covering the lane in the time it takes to draw a breath. They wore the gray coveralls of a maintenance crew and the soft-soled boots of men who meant to move quietly indoors, and not one of them carried a single tool. No bag of wrenches, no coil of duct, no testing gauge for the ventilation unit. They had all this paper about. 6 men sent to service an emergency in a plant room, and between them they hadn't brought enough equipment to tighten a screw. They had brought their hands and their nerve and a forged sheet of paper, and they had counted on those being enough to get one young guardsman to roll back a gate. I hit the alarm. There is a recessed brass plate inside the guardroom door, and a cover you flip, and a button under it that does exactly one thing. It tells the whole of Holloway Court that the throat of the palace is under threat. I had my thumb on it before the second coverall hit the cobbles, and the sound it made was not the shriek you'd imagine. It was a low, even, 3-note tone, repeating, the kind of sound built to carry calm instead of panic, and that calm 3-note tone is the most serious sound in this entire estate, because it does not mean a fire or a fault. It means men at the gate. It means the wall has been tested. And every soul in that building who has been trained to it knows that when those 3 notes start, the palace stops being a place and becomes a fist. "Stand fast," I called to Finn, stepping out into the lane with the gate at my back. "Hold the line, help's already moving." It was already moving. That's the part the man in the gray suit never understood, the part men like him cannot understand because they've spent their lives at the front of buildings, at the photographed gates, mistaking the show for the substance. They think a palace is a wall, and a wall is only as strong as the one man standing at the gap. But a wall is not the point of a palace. The point is what the wall is connected to. And when those 3 notes sounded, Holloway Court did what it is built, drilled, and sworn to do, in a sequence I have run 100 times in the dark of a winter morning, and never once for real until that day. In the guardroom, the board lit. Across the inner courtyard, the standby section, 4 men of the reserve watch who spend their shift booted and ready precisely, so this moment is never a scramble, were through their door before the 3rd tone finished its first cycle, and I could hear their boots on the cobbles, that hard even drumming, growing. Up in the duty office, Corporal Esch's flagged alert became Inspector Bram Coyle's command, and Coyle is the kind of officer who would rather be wrong and ready than right and late. He did not pause to confirm. He ordered the inner doors sealed. Somewhere above us, in the corridors of the family wing, the close protection detail, men whose entire existence is built around the possibility that the throat of the palace might one day be exactly this open, move the people they protect away from the windows and toward the rooms with no other doors. None of them could see Finn. None of them needed to. They trusted that the man at the gate was holding it, because that is the whole arrangement, the thing the uniform actually means. You hold your 6 feet of wall so that the men behind you have the seconds they need to make the wall 100 feet deep. Finn was buying those seconds with his stillness, and the system was spending them well. Hargreave wrenched his wrist free now that Finn's attention had to widen, and stumbled back and shouted at his men, "Go, go, the small gate, the wicket, take it." And that, finally, was the truth of the whole thing said out loud. Not the vehicle gate for a crew and a van of equipment. The wicket. The narrow pedestrian door. They had never intended to drive in. They had intended to walk in, 6 men through a door held open by a lie, and be lost inside the service corridors of a palace before anyone thought to count them. The first of the coveralls came at the wicket low and fast. "I have told you Finn's power was restraint, and I need you to understand that restraint is not softness. It is the hardest discipline there is, because it is the discipline of doing exactly enough and not 1 ounce more, at the precise moment when every instinct in your body is screaming to do everything." The man came through the half-open wicket. Hargreaves' grab had jarred it off the latch, and Finn met him in the gap, which is the only place one man can stop several. In the doorway, where they cannot bring their numbers to bear, where they must come at you single file whether they like it or not. He took the first man's reaching arm, turned with it instead of against it, and used the man's own momentum to fold him face first into the steel jam and down onto the cobbles, where he stayed, more surprised than hurt, the rifle never once swinging wild, the discipline never once breaking into a brawl. The second man checked his rush at the sight of his friend down, and that check cost him the 1 second he could not afford. Because the boots had arrived. The standby section came into the loading lane at a hard, even run, 4 men in formation, and they did not shout, and they did not charge in a mob. They came in the cold, drilled order of men who have done this in the dark 100 mornings, and they took the lane the way a closing door takes a room. 2 went wide to pin the men against the wall. 2 came up on Finn's shoulders to make the gap 3 men deep instead of 1. And the coveralls, who had bet everything on 6 against 1 in a doorway, found themselves in the worst arithmetic of their lives. Their surprise was spent, their lie was exposed, their van was boxed by a security vehicle that had rolled across the lane mouth, and the 1 man they needed to move had not moved an inch. Hargreave was still shouting, but the shape of his shouting had changed. It wasn't commands anymore. It was the high, scrabbling noise of a man watching a plan he'd been paid well to execute come apart in real time, watching the few minutes he'd needed evaporate into the 3-note tone still sounding, calm and relentless over all of it. "This is a misunderstanding," he was saying now to no one, to everyone. "There's a work order, there's a signed order." "There's a forged order," I said, "on a job that doesn't exist, signed by a man who's out of the country, carried by 6 men who brought no tools to a repair." I nodded at the security vehicle blocking the van, at the standby men closing the lane, at the inner doors I could hear sealing one after another deep in the building, that heavy, final, satisfying sequence of a palace becoming solid. And every door in this place just locked. You didn't beat the gate, Mr. Hargreave. You woke the building. It was over faster than it takes to tell. There is a moment, when men come to do a wrong thing by force and the force fails, where they have a choice, and most of them, almost all of them, choose to stop. The 4 coveralls still standing read the lane, the boxed van, the sealed doors, the standby section in close order, a second security vehicle now nosing in behind the first, and the patient, terrible calm of men who were neither afraid nor angry, but simply doing the next step of a thing they'd practiced. One by one, they put their hands where we could see them and went down to their knees on the cobbles, and the standby men took them without a word, raised in anger, wrists secured, faces to the wall. The man Finn had folded into the jam was already cuffed where he'd landed. 6 who'd come to walk in unnoticed were now the most noticed men in the city, and the loudest sound in the lane was the 3-note tone, still going, calm as a clock. Hargreave didn't run. There was nowhere to run, and he wasn't a runner. He was a paper man, A man who'd believed his whole life that the right document and the right tone got you through any door, and the discovery that one gate and one guardsman had been immune to both seemed to have stunned him more than handcuffs could. He just stood there, against the steel he'd grabbed, while a standby corporal read him the caution and secured his hands, and his eyes kept going back to Finn, to the man with the popped button and the creased tunic who hadn't said 10 words to him, and hadn't moved a foot and had, with nothing but the refusal to be moved, undone a thing that 6 men and weeks of forgery had been built to accomplish. Inspector Coyle came down into the lane at a fast walk, 3 minutes after the tone began, which in our drills is very good time and in real life felt like an age and was, in truth, exactly as long as it needed to be. He took the scene in one sweep, the kneeling men, the boxed van, Finn at the gap, me with the alarm cover still flipped open behind me, and the first thing he did before a single question was the right thing. He went to the gate, looked at the board with its 4 honest entries and no ventilation crew, looked at the silent plant alarm and turned to Finn. "You held it." "I held it, sir," Finn said. "On a forged order, with a man pulling at your coat and 6 coming out of a van." "The order didn't have a real signature, sir. I couldn't open the gate on a picture of one, and the plant alarm wasn't sounding. There was no emergency to balance against the order being wrong." Finn said it the way he'd say the time of day, not defending himself, not asking for credit, just laying out the arithmetic that any man at that post should have done, and that he, alone, with a clock being waved in his face and his career being threatened by name, had actually done. "It wasn't a hard decision, sir. It was just a closed gate." I have thought a great deal since about that sentence. It was just a closed gate. Because of course it was the hardest thing in the world, to stand alone at the throat of a palace while a confident man told you that your refusal would cost you your name and ruin a wing of the building, and that the only thing standing between the family above you and catastrophe was your willingness to be reasonable and roll back a little steel. Every pressure in that lane was pushing the gate open. The forged paper pushed it. The threat pushed it. The hurry pushed it, and the hurry is always the cleverest pressure, because hurry tells you that the slow checks are the danger and the fast yes is the safety, when the truth is exactly the reverse. Finn had felt all of it and had understood the one thing the whole scheme depended on him not understanding, that a closed gate is the default, and the burden is on the man who wants it open, and no amount of confidence shifts that burden by an inch. What they were after, we learned across the rest of that day and the weeks that followed, was almost disappointingly ordinary, and that ordinariness is its own lesson. There was no plot against the family in the dramatic sense. No one in the van meant the people above us harm with their hands. What Hargreave had been paid to deliver was access. 6 men, 2 hours, lost inside the service corridors of the East Wing, where the strong rooms are, where the household stores the things that cannot be replaced, not jewels for selling, those are too watched, but the small, irreplaceable archive of a fictional house. Seals, deeds, the private papers that in the wrong hands are worth more as leverage than any stone. They'd meant to walk in as maintenance, work unhurried in coveralls that make a man invisible inside a building, and walk out 2 hours later having photographed, copied, or quietly removed what they came for, with a forged work order in the system to explain why 6 men had been in the East Wing all morning. By the time anyone counted, by the time Director Oakes came back from leave and said he'd signed nothing, the trail would have been cold and the men long scattered. It was a good plan. It was a careful plan. It had exactly one flaw, and the flaw was that it required a gate to open on a lie, and the man at the gate read the lie. The forged order undid itself the moment a sergeant picked up a duty line and a corporal said there's no plant job today, and the director's been on leave 9 days. The countersign that wasn't there undid it. The printed signature undid it. But none of those checks would ever have been run if the gate had simply rolled back when a confident man told it to. And it didn't, because Aldous Finn would not be hurried, would not be flattered, would not be threatened, and would not move a gate that the proper authority had not properly opened. The whole rallying machine of the palace, the standby section, the sealed doors, the close protection detail, Coyle's command, the boxed van, all of it was set in motion by a man who refused to do the one small, reasonable, pressured thing. The system rallied, but the system only got the chance because one guardsman gave it the seconds, and he gave it the seconds by giving the man in the gray suit 2 words. No, sir. The estate did not stay sealed long. It cannot, a palace is not a tomb, it is a working household, and within the hour the 3-note tone fell silent, and the inner doors unsealed one by one, and the deliveries that had genuinely been scheduled rolled in past us. The linen van, the florist, the kitchen order, each one waved through against an honest entry on the board after a face-to-face check, exactly as the day had always been going to go. That is the part I think Hargreave never grasped, even at the end. The gate was never closed against the world. It was closed against the unverified. The linen man came in. The florist came in. They came in because their names were on the board and their faces matched their papers, and someone had signed for them in ink the day before with a name that belonged to a living, present, accountable person. The system isn't a wall that keeps everyone out. It is a question who signed for you, asked the same way of everyone, the duke and the dishwasher, and answered honestly or not at all. Hargreaves' crew could not answer it. The florist could. That was the entire difference, and it was the whole game. The investigation reached up, the way these things do when they're done right. Hargreave Facilities turned out to be a real contractor with real estate work and one corrupt manager, Hargreave himself, who had sold his access and his letterhead, and his knowledge of how the system was supposed to look to people who wanted to walk through the throat of a palace dressed as the people who fix it. He'd thought the forgery was the clever part. The clever part is always making the lie look like the truth. But a forged truth and a real one are identical right up until someone checks, and the entire scheme was a bet that no one would check in the 4 or 5 minutes it took to roll back a gate. They had studied the front of the palace, the cameras and the crowds and the show. They had not studied the back, where the show ends and the substance begins, where a man with a clipboard either picks up a phone or doesn't. They bet he wouldn't. They bet on the wrong man. Director Oakes came home from his leave to find his name had been forged onto a crime, and the first thing he did before he'd even set down his bag was walk down to the service gate to shake Finn's hand. I was there for it. They signed my name, he said, to open my own house to thieves, and the only thing that stood between them and it was you reading the box where my signature should have been and seeing it was a fake. He shook his head. I've initialed 10,000 work orders. I never once thought about the man who reads the last line of them. I'll think about him now. There was talk afterward of a commendation, and in time it came, a quiet one, the kind this regiment gives, read out on the parade square on a gray morning with the whole watch standing too. A few lines about vigilance and judgment and the holding of a post under pressure. Finn stood for it the way he stood for everything, eyes forward, face still. And when it was done, he went back on the roster the next morning as if nothing had happened, because to him, I think, nothing had. He had not done a heroic thing. He had done his job, which on most days looks like doing nothing at all, and on one day looked like the only thing standing between an open gate and a robbed house. The difference between those 2 days was invisible until the moment it wasn't. And the whole point of a man like Finn is that he treats every day as if it might be the one that isn't ordinary, so that when the day comes, he is already the man it needs. I asked him once, weeks later in the guardroom on a slow night, whether it had ever wobbled in him, whether in that lane, with the clock and the threats and the 6 men coming, any part of him had thought, maybe I'm wrong, maybe the order's real, maybe I'm about to ruin a wing of the palace and my own career over a missing signature. The reasonable doubt, the one the whole scheme had been built to plant. He thought about it longer than I expected. Of course it did, he said finally. He was very sure men are persuasive. For a second I thought, what if the alarm's faulty? What if the countersign got missed? What if I'm the one thing standing between this house and a disaster because I'm too stubborn to bend? He turned his cup a quarter turn on the table, the only restless thing I ever saw him do. And then I thought, if the order's real, 5 minutes of checking costs them 5 minutes. If it's fake, the gate is the only thing that matters. I couldn't be punished for being careful with a real order. I could never forgive myself for being careless with a fake one. So the careful thing was the only thing, and the careful thing was to keep the gate shut until someone I trusted told me to open it. He looked up. That's not courage, Sergeant. That's just doing the sum the right way round. That's just doing the sum the right way round. I've carried that sentence for years now. We talk about discipline as if it were a stiffness, a man made of straight lines who cannot bend, and we miss the truth of it entirely. Discipline is not the inability to bend. It is the refusal to bend at the wrong thing, to put the weight on the correct side of the question, every time, especially when a confident man is leaning all his confidence against you, and the easy yes is right there for the taking. Anyone can hold a gate against an enemy who looks like an enemy. The hard thing, the only thing that actually guards a palace, is to hold it against a man in a good suit with the right logo and a clock and your own career in his hand, who has done everything in his power to make the wrong thing look like the only reasonable thing in the world. 6 men came to the throat of the palace on a forged work order, counting on one guardsman to be reasonable. They are still answering for it. The house they meant to open is still closed to everyone who cannot say who signed for them, and Aldous Finn is still at his post, where I have stood beside him on 100 ordinary mornings since, watching the linen van come in past an honest name on the board. People think the strength of a palace is in its walls. It isn't. It's in the man at the gate who will not open it on a lie, and in the building behind him that comes, every time, the moment he holds.